All right. Good morning, Doug. Today we want to talk about supply chains and some of the shortages that we're starting to see in different retailers around the country. But first, you have a new background behind you. You don't have the completed bookshelf yet, but you got a few important books up there and one of your favorite characters as well. Do you want to just tell us what's behind you?
Yes. I mean, I've been suffering library envy for some time, seeing you with your background, which is real. I mean, it's not just a Photoshop thing in back of you. So I said, I want one of those too. So I've got thousands of books scattered around here and there. So I bought this kind of a it's a ridiculous palatial place in Virginia. And part of the deal is they gave me a library, or they gave me library shelves, and I'm starting to fill it up. So the most important things for the moment, well, maybe forever, is my statue of Uncle Scrooge, who's in back of me. And the first three books that I unpacked were the three novels, constant reminders to viewers, buy the books, buy the books. Um, okay, so and wait a minute, I've got this giant library with no books, but do I need any books? All I need is a Kindle. It's like this cartoon I saw several years ago where there's a couple of Englishmen sitting around a gigantic library that's empty of books, devoid of books, except on the shelf there's a Kindle and an iPod and whatever the other thing is. I don't know. And he says, "That's a great library you've got here." I thought it was funny.
It is funny, but there's something about a real physical library that makes that has tremendous value, and a big part of it for me is, I've read a lot of books in my life, but I don't have your recollection of everything. I can't recall in the same way you can, but by simply looking at the books that I have on my shelf, it reminds me of some of the ideas so that I've already spent a lot of time thinking about, and it helps me combine ideas, and it gets my brain functioning well. Also, just the ambiance of this, all the intelligence that's gone into some of these amazing books. So I like the physical library.
You're right. And I almost feel that you can absorb stuff by osmosis from them, actually. When you
Mm.
just open a book up and skim through it in 5 minutes, I mean, somehow that's recorded in your brain.
Well, and it makes connections in your brain in different places. And then actually, there's this hilarious video of this kid in Asia, and I don't know where in Asia he is, but I don't know if you've seen this video, but he's opening the book, turning the pages, and then he's grabbing it like it's a cup of water, and he's putting it over his head, and then he turns the page and he does it again. And everyone else is reading next to him, but he's like going through the pages really quickly, and he's just dumping the knowledge on his head. It's super cute, and very funny. Also, if I can find it, I'll send it to you.
As we advance further into the matrix, perhaps we can just download all that information the way Neo did. That would be fantastic.
That sure would be fantastic. So I want to talk about this supply chain stuff a little bit, because I've been bringing up with you for the last several months that I keep on the rare occasions that I go to retail stores, that I notice that there are shelves that are empty, and that might not immediately, because most of the store is still full and everything I really want, I might not have the broad choice that I had in the past, but everything I really need and want, I can get. So I can see why it wouldn't necessarily come to the attention of most people, because of that, because there aren't that kind of shortages. But for a retailer, and I only know this because I once invested in a consumer products company, that the whole game of success in that business was about retail space, about having shelf space. And we fought tooth and nail to have that shelf space, that inventory space within retail stores. And, even the things about which, are you at eye level on the shelf, or are you on the bottom of the shelf? Do you get an end cap, the end of the aisle? Do you get to show up there, or are you somewhere else? Like, these things can have huge differences in your ability to generate revenue. And retailers, it's a real science for them, or they're tracking it all. So there's no reason why there would be any empty shelf at all in a retail store if they have any control over it. So there's something going on that's causing it, so they don't have the ability to maintain the inventory in the stores in the way they would like to. So I've been noticing that for a while. We've talked about it a little bit before, but it seems like it's kind of coming to a head. We're getting more data about at least what's happening. And And I just want to kind of talk about it a little bit and talk about what the causes of it might be and what it might mean for the larger economy and maybe for the next 6 to 12 months. So, have you noticed this at all? Have you gone any? And I know you don't go shopping, and you know you don't go shopping very often, but have you noticed any of this yourself?
Yeah, I have actually, and I've thought about it from a longer term perspective, and it's an indication of how far mankind has advanced from the days when talk about stuff to buy or to have. I mean, the most important thing was going out into the woods and grubbing for some roots and berries that hopefully you could find, and that was the extent of your shopping, consuming experience. But anyway, recently, what have I found? Uh, I'm going to Freedom Fest, as I guess you are, in July. And so I wanted to rent a car for a couple of days. And I got lucky about 2 or 3 weeks ago, renting a, a junky little economy car, not even a mid-sized or a full-size, just, something really small, the cheapest thing they had, because that's all they had. And it cost $149 a day. But now, when I checked again, if I want to rent a car, same kind of car, I'm going to pay $350 a day in Rapid City, South Dakota. I mean, this is a far cry from the days when I'd fly into Dulles in Washington, D.C., and go to Hertz, and there would be several hundred cars, and I could rent anything from a Corvette to anything I wanted. And the average price was something like $50 a day.
Right.
What the heck is going on here? And this is all over the country. My attorney has a house in he's on Kauai in Hawaii, and he could not rent a car. Could not. He's taking a 2-week vacation there, and he's shipping a car from the U.S. to Hawaii so he has something to drive. Otherwise, he couldn't even get to his house or get out of it. This is insane, actually.
That really is insane. Wow, that's amazing. So I know the car thing. I mean, there's lots of reasons for it. What I've heard about it, and a lot of it is because the whole collapse of like of the tourist economy, the travel economy, at the beginning of the pandemic, and Hertz almost went through bankruptcy. So then they did go through bankruptcy actually, and so they didn't reinvest in the fleet. They probably liquidated a lot of it. But in general, used cars are up something like 30% year over year. I mean, if you bought a car last year, it's worth more now than it was last year, which is just anathema. I mean, it never happens with cars. They go down.
No, unless it's a rare Ferrari or something like that. They're depreciating assets is what they are. They're actually liabilities that are depreciating. But my friend and co-author, John Hunt, bought a Lincoln Navigator recently, 6 months ago. And, I felt like a primitive native stepping into that car because everything was automated. You don't use a handle to open the door. You push a button to open the door, going in or out. So I did some investigation. And do you know how many microprocessors there are in the typical luxury car in the US? Take a wild guess.
I'd say, I don't know, 100? Could there be 100?
No, the answer is 3,000. Now, I don't even know where you would put 3,000 microprocessors.
Wow.
Perhaps you could double check that. Perhaps there was a troll site that I was on for the internet. But there are microprocessors for everything. Of course, maybe the radio has 500 of them alone, maybe 1,000 of them. I mean, look, engines. When I was a hot rodder, I took apart engines, actually with a torque wrench and all this type of thing, and take the carburetor off. Of course, carburetors don't exist anymore. But now you can't even touch your engine, and it'll probably invalidate your warranty if you take the cover off the engine off.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's 3,000 microprocessors. So something goes wrong. Well, like your like your Travelodge that you were driving across
Yep.
country.
Yep.
It's, it, I can understand how it could be quite a task to find out which one of these 3,000 little buggers is responsible for the thing not working.
Well, someone asked us maybe 3 months ago now, there was early indications then of there being a chip shortage about 3 months ago. And one of our viewers asked us in the Q&A if you are concerned about the chip shortage. And you said, no, you weren't. You weren't concerned about it. Now, I wonder if now realizing how 3,000, I mean, and my guess is in John's car, in this Lincoln Navigator, it probably has more than 3,000 given all of the sophisticated electronics in that car.
That's
That maybe it's, I mean, now, I mean, it does seem like this chip thing is a real problem. Like it's a real problem.
well, I didn't realize this because I always thought of Intel as being the chip company, but it turns out that 80% of the world's upmarket chips are made by a company in Taiwan.
Yep.
80% of the world's supply made by one company in Taiwan. Well,
Taiwan
that's kind of,
Semiconductor.
yeah, that's kind of interesting. It's not here in America that these things are being made, but in Taiwan. And, you know, maybe China is going to do something to Taiwan.
Hmm.
And there goes the world's chip supply. This is really quite part of the supply chain.
Yeah. The whole complexity of it all is what I think. I think there's two things that stand out to me, and we could talk about. And I did a post on the Smith Sense thing blog I have, where I was just showing some of the pictures
Well,
as
that,
you
that was excellent, and people ought to tune into. You'll have to put the reference for that.
Yeah,
Well, so people
I
can
will.
go.
I'll put a link, and by the way, if you sign up for that, you get Doug's recommendations for some gold stocks in there too. So, but I was just randomly in a Walmart because I was driving my RV across the country, and this RV, the Walmarts are actually very friendly to RVers. They sell goods that RVers really need. Things like simple things like marine toilet paper. They always have in stock. So just walking through, and I'm, commenting to my girlfriend, I'm like, it's amazing how many of these shelves are empty. And it was just in the tiny areas where we walked. So while she was standing in line to check out, I went and walked around the rest of the store, or a little bit of the store, and just took some quick pictures of all of the empty shelves. And it ranges from, Tupperware to clothing, to kids clothing to, of course, bullets were completely out still. And every bicycles, there were only the highest in bicycles they have at Walmart. Usually it's totally stocked full of bicycles. I mean, all these different categories there were empty shelves for, and I just found that all shocking. So it goes across a whole bunch of different things, different merchandise areas. And then as I was digging, trying to find, okay, is my experience just this one Walmart in Iowa, or maybe there's more. And I found out that there was a letter that the Retail Federation sent to Biden that week, basically asking the feds to get involved to help, because in the survey they did of the retailers, it said 97% of the retailers said they had been impacted by port and shipping delays. 85% of them said that they're experiencing inventory shortages because of supply chain disruption. So they're asking now the feds to get involved and try and fix it. And I just wonder if that leads to price controls or who knows what.
Well, one thing that is whoever the president of that association is should be fired tomorrow morning. He's got to be an idiot asking the feds to become involved, because this whole problem is because of the feds, because of this ridiculous pseudo pandemic over a flu virus locking down the world's economy. And what do they expect the feds to do? Set up another agency and send in a team of regulators to make things even worse? I mean, this shows why there's actually no hope for the short run anyway, that people would actually ask for the feds to be involved and not see that they're the problem.
Right. Well, there's this the content producer who put out a video the other day called Hopium, and talking about how humans have this tendency to hold out hope that someone is going to rescue them. That something all of a sudden, it's like how like T-Rex at the end of Jurassic Park, it ended up showing up and saving everyone from the velociraptors. It's like we have this belief, this hope, and he calls it hopium, that like some, the daddy is going to show up somehow and solve the problems for us. And I think that is a good example of it.
Yeah, maybe we'll use hopium to find unobtainium, which is the magic metal that, yeah, of course. But yes, it's actually, as isolated as I am from most of day-to-day reality at this point, living here in my new eyrie, uh, it's affected me because, for instance, uh, trucks. You can't get a truck in this country. How do I know that? Because I had an awful lot of stuff to move from Colorado to Virginia, and the movers can't get trucks. And when they got trucks, they got things as far as Richmond. And now most of my stuff is still sitting in Richmond, waiting for the availability of trucks to take it from Richmond to the coast. This is incredible. The US is full of trucks, but the movers can't get a truck or trucks. It's amazing.
Right. And this is one of the things that you expect in an economy where you expect a market economy, essentially, that it's just a matter of the price going up, that you can still get things. You just have to pay a lot more for them. But what we're seeing is really things just aren't available at any price. Like you just can't get them. It's not even an option. So I wonder what is broken in the market economy that keeps it so that price is not, at least in the short term, the solution to the lack of availability.
Well, that reminds me of something that I just read the other day that the idiot that's running the Federal Reserve, Powell, said. And when I read this, I was gobsmacked. I was dumbstruck. But this is what he said in a recent interview. I'll read it because I wrote it down. It was so terribly rich. Quote unquote by Powell. He says, turns out it's a, oh God, I can't read my own reading. Turns out it's a heck of a lot easier to create demand than it is to bring supply up to snuff. Well, that's obvious. It's easy to create demand if you have a printing press. You just create a lot of money, give everybody $10,000, and there's instant demand. But this idiot is actually observing this like it's news to him, as opposed to something that would be obvious to a 3-year-old. It's easier to create supply demand than it is to bring supply, because people actually have to work and think and create and do stuff with their hands. But he points this out like it's a cosmic breakthrough.
Right. And he's in charge.
And he's in charge. And all he can do is create more demand to stimulate the economy. So right. That kind of leads back to what Mises said close to 100 years ago about a crack up boom, where if you create enough money, people will spend it and they'll demand stuff. And they're so busy demanding stuff and consuming, why bother working?
Right.
It's easier to consume than produce any day of the week.
Sure is. Yeah. And one of the things you used an example when we first talked about the crack up boom, and I'll have to find out which video it was, but you use this example of a pool company within, some town in California. And I thought it was funny that one of the things that's actually in real shortage right now is chlorine for pools. I don't know if you know that. And probably too many pools produced is part of it, but also there was there's some supply that's come offline because apparently there was a chlorine plant that caught fire last year at some point. So,
yeah, this is interesting. When did the world become as complex as it is right now? And there's a book that I read a review. I can't forget where. So I ordered the book, and it's actually exceptional. I wasn't expecting. The review liked it a lot. I said, okay, I'll see if the reviewer's got his head screwed on right, and he did. The book's name is Raven Rock, and I've got to say, it is really something. What it does is it traces the progress of the U.S. government, in particular, the military and security establishments, from the middle of World War II up to the present. And it is absolutely scary, breathtaking. And he details it all, and it's well written. And it's written from from my point of view, the right point of view as
Hmm.
well. So I'd like to recommend that to everybody, that book.
Hmm.
It's excellent.
Very interesting.
And
Yeah.
simultaneously, just another book that I'm reading since I'm here on the Chesapeake Bay is a book called 1493. And it's about uh, the transfer of plants and animals and other things, technologies all around the world. And the point he makes is that the biggest thing that's ever happened in world history is the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, who used to be viewed as a saint and is now viewed as a demon, or is being sold as a demon. And God, this is a tangent. I hate to go from one thing to another, and perhaps I'll win my way back to the original point. But Herman Kahn, who I think I've mentioned before, became a friend of mine. And Herman Kahn was famous. He was kind of like used as a model for Dr. Strangelove in that movie, Dr. Strangelove. And he wrote the books on thermonuclear war and thinking the unthinkable, okay, which is why he was kind of the model for that. But anyway, Herman liked to say when something was being made into a big deal currently, he says, look, there are only two important things that have happened in all of history, and this isn't one of them. And the two important things he was referring to were the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. And looking at it from a big picture, long-term point, he's absolutely right. However, this book, 1493, which I also recommend very highly, points out that actually Columbus discovering the New World, that could be the third most important thing that's happened in world history, and he explains why. But in reading it, he's got a long chapter about the foundation of Jamestown, which was the first successful English colony in North America. And the fact that these people were starving to death all the time. And the only thing that kept them alive, quite frankly, was a supply chain that was coming from the local Powhatan Indians, which is another story, very interesting, and continual ships coming from England. And it turns out, interesting, here's a fun fact, okay? Jamestown, founded in 1607, and by 1620 or 1621, when something else happened, and I'm trying to think of what that was. Anyway, do you know that although these colonists were almost always wiped out from one thing or another, that in that 15-year period, there were 7,000 colonists that came over to Jamestown, and almost all of them died. By the time 1621 came around, out of the 7,000 colonists that had come over, there were only about 500 or 600 of them that were still alive. And the only thing that was keeping them alive, other than the charity of the Indians, was more ships from England, bringing more stuff for them. So but this could happen to us. I mean, too. Here, if the Walmart closed because of supply chain disruptions and so forth, well, what am I going to eat? Frankly, I don't grow anything here. It turns out the colonists didn't know this at the time because they were all gentlemen as opposed to people that actually did stuff.
Sounds like our whole world now.
Yeah, it was a whole. Hey, but I'm a gentleman. I don't produce anything with my hands, unfortunately. But fortunately, having been a Boy Scout, I know I could go out here into the river and catch fish. And there are actually lots of oysters here. The colonists didn't know any of this stuff. They didn't know how to fish, actually. They never thought of that. This is amazing. They didn't have to starve to that. They could have lived on fish and oysters and crabs.
Well, that's the interesting thing is I think that they don't, I mean, I really feel like that kind of thing can happen here in America because nobody knows how to do any of those practical things anymore at all. Like, when was the last time that your average American family was responsible for um, the majority of the calories that that family consumed? I mean, I assume that'd have to be before World War II at some point, right? Maybe before World War One.
That's why the last depression wasn't nearly as bad as it could have and should have been, because most people were still on the farm back then. And most people on farms, you know how to do just about everything if you're on a farm. Like, for instance, in the woods around here, it's lousy with deer. They're in actual danger. There's so many of them. But I suspect few of the people around, well, maybe this is a little bit different, but most Americans don't have a gun. And if they have one, they don't know how to use it. And even if they know how to use it, they don't know anything about the skills of hunting to actually shoot a deer. But it's worse than that. After you shoot a deer, if you're lucky enough to do so, well, now you got to skin it and you got to butcher it. And then what do you do with the meat, which if the refrigeration's out, it's going to rot pretty
Right.
soon. You don't know how to make it into pemmican. I mean, it's one thing after another, isn't it?
Exactly. And so our system is so complex, so deeply complex. And I think the thing that strikes me about all of the shortages that we see of these really pointless consumer items, cheap clothing at Walmart, um, it doesn't seem like it's that important, but I think it's a sign of greater potential chaos, I guess. Like, there's so much potential energy trapped in that could damage our way of life right now, because the system seems so deeply fragile. You have this there was the Suez Canal thing, which didn't end up being that big of a deal, at least not for the US, because most of that stuff was being routed to Europe that would go through there anyway. But you have this port in China that shuts down or goes to 40% capacity because of some people test positive for COVID. And they ship out 1/3 of all the goods in the world come from that port. So it's like it just and then we all need chips that all come from this Taiwan semiconductor for apparently everything that we have and everything that we do. And I just feel like we're set up in a position where if something small goes wrong, it can be deeply catastrophic. And I don't know if maybe I should talk to Herman Kahn about that, and he would say there are only two problems, and this isn't one of them. But I don't know. It is concerning to me. I don't. Do you think it's that big of a deal? Do you think that I'm, you know,
No, I don't. And other people have thought about this, like Isaac Asimov in his Foundation trilogy. One of the interesting thoughts he had in that series of books, famous sci-fi series Foundation, was that he had after mankind has expanded many thousands of years into the future to control the galaxy, it turns out that we have a galactic government, and the galactic government takes over an entire planet and basically paves the planet with steel as opposed to concrete, I guess, or unobtainium or something like that. And so later in the trilogy, it turns out that this entire planet, which doesn't produce anything except for directives and orders for the rest of the galaxy, we find the planet totally deserted and abandoned and a ruin. So, sure, if Asimov could see it on a galactic scale, I can certainly see it on a planetary scale, or certainly a nationwide scale. I mean, look, the whole world runs on oil, and big oil companies like Shell and BP in particular are trying to get out of the oil business. I mean, the biggest private oil producers in the world, the biggest oil producers are actually national oil companies like Petróleos de Venezuela. I mean, that's a typical national oil company. So how effective are they? Not very. So the ones that are really effective at producing oil, the Exxons and the Shells, they want to get out of the oil business for all
right?
kinds of reasons. ESG, oil's bad, and all this stuff. So what's going to happen? So they're trying to reduce the supply of oil. Meanwhile, the third world doesn't care about this. They want more oil. And all this oil is shipped basically either by pipelines, which are kind of tenuous, or tankers, which are equally tenuous.
Right.
So yeah, it could all come unglued because the world is so much more interdependent and complex than it was just when I was born, quite frankly.
Right.
So this is all the stuff that we're doing now is actually terra incognita for the human race as well as for the US. This is really much more, and the worst part of it is the people are looking for government to solve the problems instead of recognizing that actually the only thing that can solve the problems is the market and profit-making entrepreneurs, and the government is the problem. So it's all perverse.
It is.
It's
I would,
all perverse, you know.
so I'm a big fan of entrepreneurs and profit-making entrepreneurs, but there's this whole other class of people that really run the major corporations in the world. I mean, they are not entrepreneurs. They're basically like bureaucrats, just like government officials, as far as I'm concerned, and they are very short-sighted in their decision making. And I think it leads to these problems. And there are two examples of this, I guess. The Colonial Pipeline hack. Who knows what really happened with any of that? But I mean, that hack made it so that that pipeline cut off a significant portion of all the fuel to the East Coast for a period of time. Not that long, but like a week. And at first I'm thinking, how can they not have any mechanical backup? How can it all be electronic like this? I mean, this pipeline wasn't built last year. This is built, decades ago, actually, a big parts of it. So how can it all be electronic? Well, it turns out they actually it was mechanical, but they didn't have the people who knew how to operate it mechanically anymore. They'd retired. So even though there was the ability to actually turn on the gasoline again manually, they didn't have people who knew how to do it. And so like that's a disaster, a risk that you can see coming as a CEO, like that there's no redundancy, that we're relying on everything going perfectly, and to choose to let those people retire and not retrain some of their skills, to the new staff, I guess, is just a failure of management, a failure of leadership, I think. And then another one you see is this with, apparently there's a deep shortage of truck drivers in the US. And that's a big problem. As much as like your problem getting a moving truck could be related to the fact there's not enough truck drivers because the trucks aren't in the right places where they're needed. It's just a meeting supply with demand as a big part of it. But this, there's, as I wrote in this little blog post I did, it's been well known for the last 4 years that the shortage of truck drivers has been a big problem. I mean, so it's not like something that sneaks up on us suddenly and unexpectedly. It was that way. It was already a problem. And yet nobody seems to do anything about it. And that's what I don't understand, is like they see these problems and no one cares. Like they just let them come. It's all about today.
You're right. I see the ads on the back of semi-trailers. Truck drivers wanted, good wages, call here, 800 number. Yeah, you see these things all the time.
Yep. And so there's been a shortage for a long time, but I just don't know what management in these companies is doing to improve it. And we talked about the chips earlier. With Intel, it's a great example, because I always thought of Intel too as like the 300-pound gorilla. I just assumed they were still that. I haven't invested in stock in a long time. I don't know that much about it. I just have this idea of Andy Grove, the legendary founder or CEO who just was really a superior manager. And it turns out that they tried to outsource. They've outsourced a lot of their manufacturing. And in fact, the CEO flew last year to Taiwan Semiconductor, to Taiwan, to work out a deal with them where they could do a lot of their most sophisticated fabrication, because they realized they were not able to produce the chips anymore themselves.
I can imagine. I can imagine the guy that is running the Taiwan chip foundry talking to the head of Intel, and he's the 300-pound gorilla talking to the silly little monkey who's
Exactly.
come to the, right.
Exactly. And they didn't come to a deal. So finally this guy decided, okay, we will build a plant in the US. So they're going to start building a plant, but it's like, I think it's like about $10 billion to build a sophisticated wafer plant now. And it takes a long time to do it. But no one's thought about the future. So no one has planned for the future at all. And I think that entrepreneurs,
and by the time, and it takes infrastructure that has to be built upon in stages. So by the time they finish that $10 billion plant, it'll probably be outmoded.
Exactly. So this is my worry about everything. I feel like our government officials are very short-term oriented. Our infrastructure bill doesn't include actual improving infrastructure. and also driving cross country, you see how bad the roads are everywhere. I mean, they are really just unbelievably awful. And, the ratio of miles blocked off for construction, so like, that are coned off basically, versus the areas that are actually under actual construction is also shocking. I don't understand that. Have like, it's like a 20-to-1 ratio.
Well, not only that, but road projects in the US, these cones stay up and the roads are under construction for years, not a few weeks, not a couple of months, years before. And whenever anything's done, I'm always amazed by they always have 2 or 3 or 4 at each end, people with flags standing around waving. This is like primitive stuff where they're paying these guys what, $30 an hour to just stand there and wave flags unnecessarily in most cases. That's all crazy.
It is
This
crazy.
consumes capital.
Huge amounts of capital. And I think, so what's the way out of it? You said is profit-seeking entrepreneurs, not government. But given the fact that these major corporations we see are really running things in really almost a partnership with the governments, and that there isn't much room for a lot of entrepreneurs to, like, I can't say, seeing all the road construction needs to happen, I can't say, hey, I'm going to start a construction company tomorrow and I'm just going to fix these roads better and faster and whatever. Like, you can't start up and compete with these guys because it seems like it's a perfected racket. How does it ever resolve itself?
Well, entirely apart from that, I really wouldn't want to get into business anymore. I mean, it's just too much of a pain in the ass. I mean, it's like being a doctor. I mean, I know a number of doctors and they all want to get out of medicine because you walk into a doctor's office today and it's all administrative staff hanging around. And the doctor has to spend most of his time dealing with that as opposed to dealing with his patients. It's like that in everything. It's all administrative hassle today. And there's not much profit left in it anymore. And you figure, is it worth the risk of doing stuff? Is it worth the aggravation? Well, not really. I mean, the only trade that actually makes sense is to learn to be a speculator, to take advantage, if you can see them, take advantage of these distortions in the marketplace, as opposed to producing stuff, capitalizing on non-production and failure to produce, if you would.
I agree.
It's perverse and it's insane. There was an article, I've got to find the reference, I don't have it here, in Forbes, where they had a woman, she's 45, member of the Danish parliament, and Forbes published an article by her with no comment, where she's actually underlying what Klaus Schwab said about I'll have nothing and I'll be happy. And she's explaining exactly why she feels that way personally.
Right.
I mean,
this was
amazing. When I first heard this meme promoted by Schwab, I thought it was a joke. I did, but it's not.
It's not. So as I'm just looking at it right now, you sent it to me this morning. It looks like it was published in 2016. So this just shows you that these things have been in the pipeline for a while. But this woman, among other things, she says, she doesn't own anything and she's happy. That's kind of the major theme. And that it basically things started gradually to become free. And so like transportation and housing. So she just kind of gave up little by little, even the desire to try and own things. And, she says that there's zero privacy, which, sometimes it bothers her a little bit because she's worried sometimes some things may be used against her in the future,
Yeah, a reasonable acknowledgement on her part, I've got to say.
Yeah. But this is the funny part to me. It says, my biggest concern is all the people who did not live in our city, those we lost on the way, those who decided that it became too much, all this technology, those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs, those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kind of lives outside of the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others have just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in small 19th century villages. I'm like, I'm one of those guys. I want to be one of those guys. maybe
Yeah,
one of the,
she must be talking about the little people out
yeah,
there that aren't part of the elite that, you know, yeah.
it's amazing. And actually,
Exactly.
I'll use this
But
opportunity to
she's,
plug.
what she is she's a modern day Eloy out of H.G. Wells' book about the future, The Time Machine.
Mm,
She can't do anything. She can't produce anything. She's totally effete and useless and has stupid ideas. I mean, she expects that it'll happen eventually. Robots will do everything. That's going to be interesting too. I mean, it could turn out that 50 years from now, turns out that we're wrong because robots are doing anything. But wait a minute, who's going to build the robots? Well, maybe other people, maybe other robots will build the robots and artificial intelligence will, who knows? Further proof we might live in the matrix for all I know.
yeah, exactly. And I think, one of the things I'll just take the opportunity to, is that talking about that article, because it is Paul Rosenberg wrote a fiction book, maybe, maybe about that time, which 2016, 2017, which
Uh,
it's called
well,
Breaking Dawn.
Breaking Dawn.
And it talks about this exact sort of thing happening, but I guess it's written from the point of view of those who are lost to the cities, to these tech control grid systems. She's in this thing, she talks about, I recognize that all my movements are tracked, my thoughts are tracked, even my dreams are known. I mean,
And
it's a,
it doesn't bother her. In fact, what she's talking about, the way she's living with not having a house where, well, I don't need a house because they can use my living room during the day when I'm someplace else. I mean, she's talking about this. It's like being a hippie in the 60s and 70s. You don't own anything. Hippies didn't own anything except maybe a pair of pants or something like that. And and just kind of wandering around. I mean, it's
well, it's even, but, or maybe like the homeless people in any given city, because, they don't have
yeah,
a home exactly.
that's right.
Their food needs seem to be met. They aren't starving to death.
No, they're not.
They don't own anything. So they don't, yeah, they don't own their own pasta maker, but that's okay. They're fine.
Yeah, and hippies didn't have to work, but they survived. So it seemed like an ideal life, just sit around smoking pot and listening to music all day. Gee, that's pretty groovy.
Yeah.
I can understand how she might feel this. I mean, it's
But she assumes her overlords are very generous and only concerned about her best interest. I think that's the key part she may be missing.
and she is a member of the Danish parliament, elected by the Danish people. I presume their election system is much less corrupt than ours is. So there were a lot of Danes that voted for this, this silly bitch.
And I think this is true of this is the scariest part about all the things that seem to be happening in the world right now, to me, is that they seem to be happening with the support of the people for the most part. I don't
Pretty
see
much.
people, there's a small minority who, we'll talk about later this week, who, have made it on, maybe part of Washington's great initiative to crack down on domestic terror. So maybe that's a small minority, it's on that side of it, but the majority of people seem to be on board with all of these, all the plans of the government, from, whether it be printing and sending stimulus checks to people, or, rolling out vaccine passports and stuff like that.
It's pretty clear that our leaders have our best interests at heart.
Yeah, right. Good thing. Good thing. All right. Well, we'll leave it there for today, and we'll talk again later this week. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Great, Matt.